Hey guys, we're back with part two of the second communication barrier that causes static in effectively relaying what we're trying to say to our audience is distracting gestures. I don't think we really need to go over this again because we really hit hard on this back in December, and many of you kind of identified what yours are. But when your gestures create a visual for your listeners, they're going to remember that information. They're going to grab your listeners' attention, and then they're going to add energy and inflection in your voice and to channel your adrenaline and nervous energy. So gestures, I want to reiterate from this article, are a good thing. You should be utilizing them. You shouldn't aim to stand stiff and straight. That looks uncomfortable and unnatural. But it's a matter of making sure that they are used effectively and at the right moments of emphasis. And you really should practice using gestures in and integrating them into your speech. Okay, communication barrier number 3, I think is also important, is a lack of focus. So the more information you're going to add to your presentation, the greater risk that your listeners are going to misinterpret your point. So we will get to more tips on this in just a minute with regard to how to add emphasis and how to repeat certain elements, because you do want repetition, but you want repetition in the sense that it is not overly simplistic. So we'll get to that in a second. But when you begin to say too much and feel like a train about to derail, put the brakes on, pause yourself, and get back on track. Back on track. It's okay to pause in the midst of your speech. Just take a deep breath, take a moment, and be like, okay, so I want to re-emphasize point number 2, or kind of redirect your audience back with a verbal cue. The second is to keep your objective in mind. Think in terms of what your listener needs to know about and what you want to do, not what you want to tell them. So put your thoughts into words, focus your message on no more than 3 clear, specific points. Pay attention to your listeners. As a teacher, I find myself doing this all the time, looking around the classroom and saying, wow, I've lost at least 3/4 of the students right now. This person's eyes are glazed over. This person is sleeping. This person is staring out the window. And sometimes there's nothing you can do. You have to just keep going forward. But most of the time you can redirect an audience if you're paying attention to them. So that's important. Communication barrier number 4 is using your presentation tool as a crutch. These are supposed to be visual aids, not wordy slides. They're supposed to help you to stay on track, provide some sort of an outline or context point, but not to be the sole, it is not the presenter you are. I guess I'll just sum it up that way. And so ask yourself, why am I using this particular slide? How is it best supporting your message? Is it helping with the listener's expectations and needs? Is it helping to build their experience and knowledge level? Is it helping you to stay on time and target? So you want to save certain details for handouts or verbal cues. You want to stay away from software overkill if you're clicking the mouse every few seconds. That's why, like, the flying in and the fading out and all those transitions are kind of not helpful most of the time. And then if you are just using sort of the standard, like you click on Google Slides and you choose like the first or the second like theme, change it up, because you're going to get bored yourself with it. You need to see creativity embedded in it. And each presentation should uniquely fit each of your topics. And so the theme of the presentation should match your topic. Number 5 is verbal static. All of these things impair your reader's ability to track with you. So the number 1 challenge that individuals need to overcome to increase their influence is the ability to replace non-words with a pause. We use non-words to buy ourselves time to think about what we want to say. These words are distracting and your listener misses your message. One thing that I noticed a lot as I was making these videos more and more, because I'm making tons of videos every week now, is that I think more slowly than I realized. I have to give myself a moment to process before it can just come out of my mouth. Some of us are slower at verbal mental processing. Others are more quick. And so one thing that I've realized I do a lot is pause. I do use filler words such as and however, there are a lot of pauses in what I say. And sometimes it feels uncomfortable to me to watch it and think, gosh, why do I take so long, as if I'm stuttering? But that's think time. And think time with the pause, experts say, is more effective than think time with an or an or a distracting gesture like a or something like that. So eliminate these filler words because it will help you to get to the point and avoid rambling. You need to practice taking a relaxing breath. Try to think about what you're saying without just rambling verbally. Interact with your audience and try to read their their visual cues on their faces. Hold their attention, gain control over your message. All of those things are going to help. Communication barrier number 6, and this is the last one for this presentation, is a lack of eye connection. There's not really a great way to maintain that, obviously, over the computer. Unfortunately, try to stare at the camera up at the front or my slide, but do your best because you will be presenting on a device of sorts. But just don't read or stare at yourself. If I were staring at myself, I'd always be looking over there. Look at the camera and try to deliver the message directly to your audience. Okay, so that's it for this sort of technique of communication barriers. The last one I want to go over in this section has to do with introducing you to something you're going to be doing this week twice. There are several speeches. These are very popular speeches, and there are all kinds of different speeches. So we have what is it like to teach in North Korea? And this was a TED Talk in 2015 from FDR and his Pearl Harbor address. You have something like Escaping Poverty or the inaugural address given by Barack Obama. There's speeches given by children about kind of what do you believe and how can you advocate for change. This is called Greening the Ghetto. So if you scroll through, there are a variety of presentations, and what this website authority has done is they link the speech so you can watch the speech, and then following this speech there will be different lessons for you to take away given what the speaker has done and what he or she has done well. And it's mostly going to be a positive critique and analysis. So I wanted to go over one with you just to kind of help you understand what it is that I'm expecting from this. If you look at the description on the portal, it's going to say watch one speech and read its critique and then summarize what you learned from this analysis and discuss it on Flipgrid. Since there are so many options, you may not all end up doing the same thing, I hope, and that way you'll get to learn about a variety of different things when you look on Flipgrid. So obviously, this is the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., and it gives you sort of this process to walk through. So you'll want to watch the video, then you're going to read the analysis, study the speech text, and then share your thoughts. And you'll be sharing your thoughts on Flipgrid. So just go ahead and do all 4 of these points. Okay, so you would watch the speech, which we're not going to do here, and then it gives sort of the 5 different lessons that we're going to take away from the speech. One is to emphasize phrases by repeating at the beginning of sentences. Second is to repeat key theme words. 3 is to utilize appropriate quotations or allusions. And then 4 is to use specific examples to ground your arguments. And then use metaphors to highlight contrasting concepts. As we go through this, he's going to give very specific examples. And one of the things that I ask you to discuss in your Flipgrid is what are you taking away from this and how will you utilize these skills and techniques for your own presentations. So for instance, anaphora is a word that we've gone over, believe it or not, in English, which is just the repetition of words at the beginning of a clause or a phrase. So it's a rhetorical device and you repeat these words to kind of set a pattern. And it creates rhythm, and so I have a dream is repeated 8 times. And it's one of the most often cited examples of anaphora in modern rhetoric. But it's just one of 8 occurrences. He also has other instances of anaphora. 100 years later, in paragraph 3, he repeats these phrases. Now is the time. Now is the time. That's in paragraph 6. We must. We can never, cannot be satisfied. Go back to. And so all of these are instances of repetition. When you read these phrases in sequence, even the absence of the remainder of the speech, the key phrases are going to tell much of his story. So emphasis through repetition makes the phrases more memorable, and it makes his story more memorable. If we read this in summary, what the author is saying is that that's his speech. So what could you emphasize in your persuasive speech in sort of this pattern of repetition that would tell your story without all of the other words? Lesson 2 is to repeat theme words throughout your speech. Theme words are different. Anaphora is a specific phrase that is repeated word for word for word. A theme that's repeated doesn't have to be exactly the same phrase. So there are, and this is much more subtle. If you count the frequency of words used, such as I have a dream, interesting patterns emerge. The most common noun that is used is freedom, used 20 times in the speech, which makes sense because freedom is one of the themes. Other themes that he uses are we, used 30 times, our, 17 times, and you, 8 times. And that, in essence, like when I'm speaking to you as an audience, I'm expecting some type of a response. I'm expecting some type of an action. And he talks about nation, America, American, justice and injustice, and dream. And again, if you use the word association, it shows you the frequency of the words. So what thematic elements in your persuasive speech could you use more than one time? Lesson 3 is to utilize appropriate quotations or allusions. It's okay to cite or reference what other people have said. He references the 500 years ago, which is from the Gettysburg Address, which began at the Lincoln Memorial, or 407 years ago. He references the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness from the Declaration of Independence. And he uses a lot of biblical allusions and direct citations of quotes and verses from the Bible. What is the benefit of this? This is it adds credibility, and it links to something that people are already familiar with to kind of ground that structure. Lesson 4 is use specific examples that are going to ground your arguments. So in his speech, this is how we talked earlier about, I think in the first lesson, about using story and layering fact and information with story. He's going to talk about specific occasions that call for action. And he cites like Mississippi, New York, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, New Hampshire, and he calls out certain places and discusses what's going on there to evoke an emotion and images from your audience. So using specific examples that people can visualize and put themselves in that place is going to be important as well. He uses generic geographic references as well to make his message more inclusive, such as slums and ghettos in our northern cities, or the South, or from every mountainside, village, and hamlet. So that it feels more inclusive. And lastly, he uses metaphors to highlight contrasting concepts. So joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. Every man lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. Use descriptive metaphor. We haven't talked about that as much. We've been more fact-based. But when you're telling a story, specifically in persuasive speech, it's really important to utilize more story form or creative writing forms, because that builds reader interest and engagement. So then you would kind of look over the transcript with certain things highlighted, and then you're going to write about what you learned or talk about it on Flipgrid.